One thing Mulan does brilliantly, and I mean quietly, cleverly, almost sneakily, is expose how much of what we call masculinity and femininity is just playing a role. Mulan puts on makeup, woman. Mulan cuts her hair, man. Mulan walks with grace and folds her hands, woman. Mulan wields a sword and saves China, men. It would be hilarious, except it's fucking tragic. I mean, if this is our ideas of masculinity and femininity, some of you might be shocked to discover that heels were invented for men, or that historically pink was intended as a color for boys and blue was associated with girls. These are not supposed to be fucking trends, okay? It's not like Mulan became a man, she just simply acquired the skills associated with one. She learns how to fight, she learns how to strategize, how to move with precision, how to step into command. But the gag is, she already knew the rest. She already knew how to move in a dress, how to present softness, how to perform poise. She knew the rituals, the social codes. She literally applies that knowledge later on her army friends to save the emperor. Yes, Mulan gives a makeover to a bunch of grown men, and it's hilarious and iconic, and you know, if you somehow still haven't seen this movie, this is enough reason for you to watch it. I mean, she gives a makeover to everyone but Shang, of course, because we couldn't possibly have the romantic lead wearing rouge. He must remain 100% unbreakably protein shake masculine, or society would spontaneously crumble. I'm sorry, I'm kidding. I'm gonna stop. But anyway, what this movie's trying to say is that masculine and feminine traits aren't fixed identities. They're skills. They're learnable. They're movable. They're tools, not templates. Being nurturing isn't a personality trait, it's a skill. Being assertive, also a skill. Dominance, submission, cooking, fighting, confident, planning. These are not encoded into your chromosomes, okay, babe? These are learnable patterns of behavior. So when people say being feminine means being nurturing, okay, cool. What if I'm a man and I learn to nurture? Am I a woman now? Or if a woman like Mulan learns to fight, are we men now? Of course fucking not, because none of this was ever about biology now, is it? It was about limiting access to skills based on what you were assigned at birth. Everyone has both. You're supposed to. That's how we're designed, which brings me to the next part. Now, let's talk about Mulan's victories. She saves an entire army. She outsmarts a group of men who've trained their whole lives for war. She creates an avalanche using logic and intuition on the fly. And for a moment, just a moment, she's being celebrated, praised. She becomes the hero, the warrior, the one everyone's looking at with awe and admiration until her gender is revealed. And immediately that admiration turns to disgust, to fear, to rejection, and violence, question mark. It's not that her actions became less impressive, it's that the container she came in no longer matched the story they wanted to believe. And that's every woman, every feminine coded person who's ever been applauded until they crossed that invisible line. We say we love talent, we say we celebrate excellence, but what we really mean is we love it when it behaves the way we expect it to. You can be powerful as long as you don't threaten our hierarchy. You can be successful as long as you don't ask for too much visibility. You can lead, but don't make us feel smaller when you do it better. It's the reason we see women breaking records, and instead of saying, wow, the narrative shifts to questions like, well, is she too ambitious? Is she being aggressive? Is she likable enough? Listen, we praise bold ideas until we find out they came from a woman. Then we call them unrealistic or overreaching, a bit much. It's the same with Mulan. Her achievements are undeniable. But once the system finds out she's a woman, they're no longer permissible, because in a binary system, liberation is always conditional. You can rise, but only within your lane. Here's where it gets even more interesting. The people who threaten the system most aren't the rebels screaming at the gate. It's the ones who blur the lines, the ones who refuse to perform the script convincingly. Masculine presenting women, feminine presenting men, people who don't fit cleanly into either, people who don't perform gender, they embody complexity. That's what drives the system mad. But why? Well, unfortunately, we cannot have a deep dive into the feminine and masculine without talking about power, because that's why. The binary categorizes people and organizes power. It's how we decide who leads and who follows, who speaks and who listens, who earns and who supports, who gets softness and who has to pretend they don't need it. So when someone shows up wearing both energies, strong and soft, intuitive and assertive, they collapse the illusion. They say, hey, maybe this whole gender performance thing is just that, a performance? Mulan is dangerous not because she's a good soldier. She's dangerous because she reveals how much of soldiering is just training, how much of masculinity is a script, and how anyone given the right tools and permission can play the part. She threatens the idea that gender is destiny. She threatens threatens the idea that worth is binary. And most of all, she threatens the people who've built their entire identity on being the only ones allowed to lead. So when the mask slips and Mulan is revealed, the praise is ripped away because she might have won, okay, but it seems more important to the system that she disobeyed, not the rules of war, but the very rules of existence. And that's important because we still do this today in a different form, of course, but still, right now in real time, we're rejecting people who are becoming more whole, people who are figuring out who they really are outside of scripts, outside of binaries, outside of their parents' unfinished business. And instead of saying, wow, look at how complex and full this person is becoming, we say, they're ruining everything. I mean, to be fair, from a psychological perspective, that's not a surprising reaction. It's common knowledge that people fear change because it introduces uncertainty. It makes them question their own choices, their own suppression. So of course it's very human to blame the ones who change. We call it confusing, we call it unnatural, we call it a threat to tradition, but really, it's just a threat to our comfort. Because let's be honest, this whole thing we're doing, where we punish differences and protect sameness like it's sacred, yeah, it's not working. And it's not healthy. And it's sure as hell not sustainable. Instead of honoring people who become more of themselves, who get louder, gayer, softer, sharper, freer, we act like they're breaking something. But maybe the system needs to break, huh? Don't you think? Let's talk. Maybe the real problem is that the system was never designed to hold complexity. Instead of adapting the system to include more kinds of people, we keep trying to trim people down to fit the system. And then we wonder why everyone's anxious, disconnected, and quietly performing all the time. Come on, guys. We say things like, well, our grandmothers didn't live like this, our grandfathers didn't need all of this, but they also didn't live this life. These times that we're in, this reality, they didn't have this level of visibility, this access to identity and information, this space to question. We're not ungrateful, okay? We're evolving, and in a healthy society, that would be something to celebrate. We would ask, why do we still treat nuance like a liability? Why do we fear complexity like it's going to break the system? Here's a better question though. Why are we still trying to protect a system that only works for a few? So the most revolutionary part of Mulan isn't the avalanche, isn't the sword fight, it's not even the reveal or the fact that the emperor bowed in front of her. Because like honestly, that's the bare minimum. Like the woman literally defeated the fucking Huns, okay? No, none of that is as iconic as the ending. Because Shang doesn't show up in armor, he doesn't show up to dominate, to reclaim, or to restore his ego. No, he shows up uncertain and soft. There's this beautiful awkwardness in him, a kind of vulnerability that isn't performative, but very genuine, very real. He fumbles with his words, he stands a little too straight, like someone who's used to having answers, but in this moment, he has none. He's not there to impress her, he's not there to fix her, he's there to meet her, and that, psychologically speaking at least, is huge. Because when we think of masculinity, especially in a patriarchal lens, it's often associated with pursuit and certainty and dominance and control. Ugh. But what we see in Shang is the dismantling of all that. He is not rejecting his masculinity, he's expanding it. In this final moment, Shang is no less masculine than he was on the battlefield. But now his masculinity includes hesitation. It includes respect, it includes emotional risk, and that is what we call integration. Not the rejection of one side, but the inclusion of both. The ability to show up in softness without losing strength, to show up in love without abandoning logic, to show up in relationship, not to complete someone, but to witness them as already whole. It's almost as if this is the final message of the film. When we embrace the full spectrum of what we carry, our inside and outside energies, our yin and yang, we stop performing gender and we start becoming human. If there's anything I want you to remember from this deep dive is that masculine and feminine aren't boxes, they're axes, like up and down, left and right, sun and moon, each of them a duality, not designed to divide us, but to give us range. Up and down, for instance, don't compete, they give us height. Left and right don't argue, they give us direction. Sun and moon don't cancel each other out, they create the rhythm of a day. And masculine and feminine, when allowed to flow freely, don't determine our worth or our roles, they create a human being, a full one, a nuanced one, a real one. And that's what Mulan ultimately teaches us, not how to be a man or how to be a woman, but how to be brave enough to love, strong enough to serve, and human enough to grow. Psychologically speaking, you're probably bored of hearing me saying it, but this is the point of individuation. To transcend the roles you were given, to integrate all of your parts, to walk into the world not as a performance, but as a person, alive and whole, and finally free. But guys, let's talk for a second about Grandma Fa, not just as comic relief, not just spiritual skeptic, but as the embodiment of a deeper pain many of us carry, the pain of being shut out of our own divinity. See, when she scoffs at the ancestors and says, "What good can they do? They're dead." I mean, I don't remember if that's exactly what she says, but that's what she says in Italian, so I'm just translating. That's a bit more than just sarcasm, okay? That's a soul that's been let down one too many times. She's not mocking spirituality, okay? She's mourning what it could have been, or at least that's how it seems to me, what it should have been. Because listen, for a lot of people, especially those who've been historically oppressed or pushed to the margins, spirituality was never really made for them. They were told what to believe, how to pray, who could speak, who could be seen as pure, and that permission, that access to the sacred, it was always tied to behavior, to obedience, to being clean, quiet, proper, doing it right. And so spirituality became something external. Rules, rituals, hierarchies, the outside energy of the sacred, the masculine energy of the sacred, if you will. Light the candles, bow the head, say the prayer, perform your worthiness, because the divine only listens to the clean. What happens though when you don't feel clean? When you're a girl who speaks out of turn, or a woman who can't be soft enough to pass the test, or a woman on her period that cannot enter the church, or a person who's too queer or too angry or too complex to fit the mold. You start to believe that you are spiritually defective, that the divine is not for you, that your inner world, your inside energy isn't welcome in the sacred space unless it behaves itself. And to this point, there's a TikToker that goes by no nonsense spirituality that speaks on this phenomenon brilliantly, I would say. While I don't agree with a lot of her points, especially when it comes to free will, I find that her analysis on spirituality is really spot on. So you know what? I'm just gonna let her speak for herself.
From Gandhi, I learned that kindness and equality doesn't apply to your wife, whom he controlled and abused. Through the atonement of Jesus, I learned that bleeding out or feeling the pains of the world is only valid when it is done by a man. When a woman bleeds, it is unsanitary, and when a woman feels the suffering of the world, she's histrionic. The Buddha taught me about enlightenment, but also that women are roadblocks to enlightenment, and that you can leave your wife and child in order to sit under the Bodhi tree. Einstein taught me about the God of Spinoza and having awe for the nature of reality, but that his first wife didn't deserve to be in his footnotes. Her place was to do his housework. In school, I learned about civil disobedience and civil rights from Martin Luther King, but also that if you are a woman, black or white, you are still a sexual object first. In Mormonism, my first faith language, I was taught that God spoke to man and God spoke to a prophet, and that God demanded polygamy, and that the young girls who were told that they needed to marry Joseph Smith in order to prevent their families from going to hell were just collateral damage to this God. I learned about simple living and inner peace from the Dalai Lama, but when he was asked if a female Dalai Lama could succeed him, he said yes, but in order for her to do anything useful, she needed to be attractive. When he was called out on this, he said it was just a joke. And I learned from the holy texts in the West that God, with his male pronouns, is the one who single-handedly creates life, not the women who continue to die in childbirth. Over and over, I have learned that men have taken my innate spirituality and given me back crumbs of what the sacred feminine used to be. In every field of spirituality, in all of my wanderings, I have been asked to prove my worth as a woman. In almost every field of spirituality that I've explored, I've been asked to prove my worth. I've been asked if I'm worthy enough to enter their temples, if I've solved a koan to their liking, if I've had a kundalini awakening at the level that they have. They will ask if I have the appropriate credentials and the right acromens to even sit at the table. I've been told over and over that my life that is rich with spiritual connection is only acceptable when it is judged acceptable by a man or a male god. In return, they demand their priesthoods and their tithings and their titles and their trophies. For me personally, it took years to disentangle the internalized patriarchy from 2 decades of study in religion and philosophy and history. And what I learned from the female mystics is that spirituality needs none of that pomp and circumstance. Ideas can be powerful even when they are shared over coffee and conversational language. Books can be profound even when they're not written in language that can only be read by other academics. Rituals can be sacred even when they're household routines. A contemplation practice where you listen to a podcast while walking your dog is just as valid as being able to sit in a full lotus pose. Liturgical calendars can operate around the birthdays and anniversaries of the people who are important to us. The sacrament can be the gift of sourdough bread that you got from a starter that you bought at a farmer's market. Revelation is when an intuitive friend texts, "How are you doing? Are you okay?" Female mystics taught me that divinity can be found even in the most ordinary places when life and spirituality are so enmeshed that they can't be separated. Follow me here for more no-nonsense spirituality, coming to you with my first post in the new she shed, which is not yet operational, but it's getting there, and by the time I'm done with it, it'll be a more sacred place than the Mormon temple that's just around the corner that doesn't allow me in because I'm not worthy.
Yeah, so that's what we've done to spirituality. We made it so external, so performative, so coded in doing that we forgot its origin was always in the being, in the stillness, in the intuitive voice, in the part of you that feels the sacred before you ever speak it out loud. That's why Grandma Fa matters, because she's all of us when we've been made to feel that spirituality is something we can't access unless we follow all the steps and still get left behind. She's the person who saw too many rituals fail, perhaps, too many prayers go unanswered. And eventually she decided maybe this isn't real, or maybe it's just not for me. But then Mulan disappears and something stirs. Not logic, not ritual, but love, because remember, love has no gender. That deep non-verbal inside energy that says something's wrong, something's shifting. And that's when it happens. She turns to the ancestors, not to follow protocol, but to connect. No candles, no incense, no perfect posture. Just a shout into the ether made from the heart. And guess what? That's the moment the divine responds. Not before, when the father was asking the ancestors to impress the matchmaker. Real spirituality doesn't require perfection and doesn't give a shit about the invented rules of humans. The sun exists with or without a god to worship. Spirituality doesn't require performance. It doesn't even require belief. It just requires honesty. And that's what we've lost. In a world obsessed with the outer energy of the spirituality, we've forgotten the inside energy of it. The part that holds grief, the contradiction and the longing. The part that doesn't need to know the name of the god to feel the pull towards something higher. The part that doesn't care whether you bow or scream so long as you're telling the truth. That's why there's no one true religion, no one right path, because the divine doesn't want your obedience, it wants your presence. And everyone's presence is going to look different because everyone's inner life is different. So, in a way, Grandma Fa is the bridge. She's the broken line that becomes whole again. She's the moment we stop doing spirituality and start feeling it. She reminds us that maybe the reason so many of us felt spiritually lost isn't because we lacked belief, it's because we were never taught to trust the sacredness of our own inner world. And maybe it's time we started there. Alright, so what did we learn today? That war is terrifying, patriarchy is lazy, gender roles are bad theater, and honestly, Mulan, well done, writers. Well done. We learned that putting on makeup doesn't make you a woman anymore, then cutting your hair makes you a man. But most importantly, we learned that these energies that we keep shoving into pink and blue boxes, yeah, they're not opposites. They're partners, they're collaborators. They're here to work together, not file for a divorce every time you cry at a Disney movie, for God's sakes. So, Mulan isn't just a story about breaking gender roles, it's about integration. It's about what happens when someone dares to live outside the script and realizes that all the skills and the strengths and energies were already inside. And you know what? If all else fails, just ask yourself, would Mushu approve of this decision? If yes, proceed with chaotic confidence. If not, well, just ask Creaky. He knows everything and never says a word. But anyway, here we are at the end of this video. If you made it, well done! I'm very proud of you. And as a reward, I'm going to give you the therapy question of today. I'm thinking of inserting this as a little perk for whoever watches until the end. Who would I be if I stopped performing the version of myself that made other people comfortable and started choosing the energy that made me feel alive? Well, leave your answers in the comments, leave your feedback and your opinions. I look forward to reading them. Thank you so much for your support and for your presence here. I'm truly grateful for the amazing stability that you give to this channel and to this community, and I truly hope to see you guys next time with the next deep dive. And if you're watching this on YouTube, well, make sure to like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell, all the works. Take care of yourselves and stay golden, guys.
Whenever you feel your world is crashing down on you.